I'm glad to see so many people are interested in dependency management and specifically some strategies for working with it in Drupal. And the reason it's so important is, of course, because modern web development is very complicated and complex. It used to be very simple. We code some HTML, some CSS, JavaScript, FTP it up to the server. Can't do that anymore. Now we have version control. We have build tools, content management systems like Drupal, and we're better for it, but the complexity comes with some challenges, and that's why we use tools to manage our dependencies. And we refer to those tools as dependency managers, which is very important because if you don't use a dependency manager, then you are the dependency manager. And I thought that I had heard this phrase at some point, and I wanted to attribute it to whoever originally said it. I couldn't find anything about that, but I typed it in to a Google search, and the AI response I thought described what it's trying to say very well. It said, the statement highlights the responsibilities and challenges of managing dependencies manually without the aid of a tool designed for this purpose. When you manage dependencies without a dependency manager, you must track all of the libraries and their versions, ensure they are compatible, and handle updates and conflicts yourself. And it sounds like not that big a deal for a simple project, but things get very complicated very fast. So, that's what we're going to talk about today, is modern strategies for dependency management, specifically in a Drupal project. I'm Rick Hawkins. I lead the Drupal team at Slalom, which is a business and tech consulting company based out of Seattle, where I live. And we have offices, almost 50 offices around the world. And our team supports, we're a global support team, so we support all the offices. I maintain a couple of dozen modules on Drupal.org, and one of the organizers for the Seattle Drupal user group. And I'm glad to be back in Chicago. My first DrupalCon, the first DrupalCon I went to was here in Chicago in 2011. And it'll be great to come back again next year. And if you want to come out to the Pacific Northwest, we have the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit in October of this year. It's going to be outside of Portland. It's going to be a lot of fun. So what we're going to talk about today is the current state of dependency management in Drupal. We'll take a look at our goals. What are we trying to achieve when we implement a solution for managing our dependencies? What are the options out there for managing dependencies? Taking a look at some new approaches, ways to think about your dependencies differently. We'll talk about the future, what is possibly coming, or we know is coming for sure in Drupal, in the dependency management realm, and then I'll do a live demo of some of the things that I talked about. So first off, there are a couple different types of dependencies that we see in a Drupal project. Because it's a PHP, Drupal is a PHP project, of course we have PHP dependencies. And you'll hear the term packages and libraries sometimes used, similarly. For the purposes of this discussion, I'll use packages when I'm talking about PHP, or I'll try to anyway, and I'll say asset libraries, or say libraries when I mean asset libraries. And so unless you're doing something, with Ruby or Python, and you'd be using the dependency management for a tool that is appropriate for those languages, you're using Composer for PHP packages. Then there are also asset libraries, which are generally refer to JavaScript libraries, CSS, front-end frameworks, fonts, icons, that sort of thing. And within those two groups, there's also this idea of dependencies that are used for the development of whatever you're delivering, or non-development. And the way that I like to think about it is the code that's part of the library actually being presented to the end user? If it is, then it's not development. If it's used, if it's something that's Vite or Webpack, PostCSS or Gulp for compiling, that sort of thing, those would be development dependencies. So non-development libraries, let's say you use Alpine.js for basic interactivity, Tailwind, that sort of thing. Those are actually being presented to the user. the end user. This is the dependency tree for Drupal as of 11.1.6. So the nice thing is we don't have to worry about any of this. We just composer required Drupal, and we get all of this for free. Each one of these keeps track of its own dependencies, and for the most part, it works pretty well. And that was introduced, of course, in Drupal 8 when we moved from Drupal 7 to 8. We started using those. We switched to Symfony, so a good chunk of the packages that were on that list are Symfony related. And then the contributed module space adopted the same pattern that Core used, and so you see modules like the address module, which uses a separate package that is not Drupal specific for managing addresses. S3 file system uses the AWS software development kit for PHP. Migrate source, for example, CSV uses a library to parse the CSV. Usually this works well because somebody else has probably written something that, for example, does geometric operations, and so the geo field can just take advantage of that by making it a dependency. And then one of the modules that I maintain is called Sodium, and it leverages the native encryption functionality in PHP, which is also called Sodium. But me writing the encryption implementation would have been a bad idea. So for security purposes, I'm leveraging Halite, which does the heavy lifting for actually implementing the encryption, and that was built by the smart people at Paragon Initiative Enterprises, who I trust to actually deliver a secure solution better than I can. So over the years, there have been some improvements to Composer. There was a big burst of activity around 8.8, new innovations that I think have made working with Composer in Drupal quite a bit easier. Perhaps you agree. It was a little rough at the beginning with managing the dependencies, the versions, and that sort of thing. So we get things like Drupal. These are all, by the way, outside of Drupal core. These are all maintained on GitHub. Core recommended locks in versions of the various dependencies that Drupal uses to exactly what was released. And so when you use that, you know that the tests have passed. Everything is working exactly as it was when that version of Drupal core was released. Core Composer Scaffold introduced a new Composer command that copies files from one directory to another, which allows us to scaffold and not have to track files like index.php, the primary index file, update.php, htaccess, robots, that sort of thing. The recommended project is a starter that most people, I think, use these days that has a basic structure for creating a new Drupal project. And then there are a couple of others for development and that sort of thing. So this has helped make management of PHP dependencies in Drupal quite a bit easier. Asset libraries is another story. We've got the PHP dependencies kind of worked out. We've got that standardized. So this is a list of all of the asset libraries that are bundled with Drupal. These are not dependencies the way that the PHP dependencies were. These are actually included in the code, and you can see CK Editor 5, which was added in Drupal 9.5. You can see jQuery is still there. jQuery UI is, in fact, no longer supported, so it has been forked and put into Drupal, and this version is maintained there. So very different from how things are working with PHP. In Drupal core development, Yarn is used, but there is no standard asset library tool that is officially recommended the way that it is with Composer. So within contributed extensions, you see a lot of dependencies on asset libraries. So for example, Bootstrap themes, of course, require Bootstrap in some way. Chosen requires the chosen.js library, etc. Webform can require a ton of asset libraries, depending on what you're using. This has been working with these sorts of dependencies have been a challenge in Drupal for a long time, even going back to Drupal 7, just because there is no standard way of getting these libraries into your code base. So there are lots of different ways that we can approach this, and let's talk about the 4 things we're going to be looking at when we decide what we want to, how we want to manage a particular dependency for a contributed module, say. We want to focus on maintainability. How easy is it to keep the asset library up to date? And security. My policy is that only files that need to be under the web root should be under the web root. So we want to make sure we're not putting files that aren't needed in there. Reliability, we want to make sure that we can actually load it so that it can be used and we can trust that it's going to be there and that it's going to be fast as possible. So these are the 5 ways that I've identified for including an asset library dependency, for a contributed module. The one standard that we have sort of agreed upon is that the place for these libraries is within the web root in the libraries directory. Beyond that, it's a little bit, you can see that there are a lot of different ways that we approach this. In Drupal 7, many modules use the libraries API module, and that provided a sort of a standard way of working with asset library dependencies. I'm not seeing as much of that post Drupal 8. So you can use a bundled library. That is a library that just got included with the contributed module, a content delivery network, or CDN. A lot of modules just suggest you download manually and put the files in a particular place. You can use Composer, or you could use another dependency tool like NPM or Yarn. So in order for the library to be bundled with a contributed module, the license has to be compatible with Drupal's, or you will not be able to host it on Drupal.org. So as I mentioned, CK Editor 5 is included in Drupal core. It's just bundled in there. The Bootstrap 5 theme includes all of Bootstrap. So that has been committed to that contributed modules code base. CDN is a popular way to very easily include an asset library, and most of these are pretty reliable. CDN.js has been available since 2011. It's managed and powered by Cloudflare, which is of course very reliable. JS Deliver has been around since 2012, and it uses multiple CDNs, Cloudflare and Fastly, so you can trust that it's going to be available when you have an internet connection. But using a CDN when you're offline tends to prove to be challenging if you're trying to develop. So sometimes it's better. It's more preferable to have the files locally, so you can at least work offline, or you know that you're sort of managing that access. And if your server goes down, everything goes down. And so generally the performance would be good. The security, no concerns there. Downloading manually means that you are probably downloading it, putting it into some directory, probably libraries, committing that code. And another one of my goals is to not commit anybody else's code and to bring it in through some sort of dependency management tool or some sort of scaffolding system. So examples of the kinds of modules that suggest that, if you look at the project pages, Chosen will tell you to download the chosen.js files and place them in a particular place. Sometimes there's a drush command that will download it for you, so you can see a couple of examples of that. The Chosen module has a drush command called Chosen plugin. It will download the files and put them in the libraries directory. You can use Composer. So there are a couple of asset libraries that are so popular that they are just available in the packages, which is the default Composer repository. And so Bootstrap and Fawn Awesome are examples of that. Asset Packagist is another popular approach, and that is using a different repository for accessing asset libraries using Composer. And then you can actually define a custom repository for GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab. All of these options feel a little hacky to me, like Composer is not the right tool for asset libraries. It's a PHP dependency manager. And in a lot of cases, the files will be saved in a different directory than you want, so you're going to need to move them. If you, for example, if you bring Bootstrap or Fallen Awesome in through Composer, it's going to put them in the vendor directory, and that's probably not where you're going to want them for your theme if you're building a theme. There have been discussions about making asset packages the officially recommended approach to managing asset libraries, and there are concerns about reliability. It has gone down for a time, and the ongoing maintenance of it is not something that people feel comfortable attaching themselves to and making it be the standard way to get asset libraries. But this is how you would do it with Asset Packagist. You add a new repository. I called it Asset Packagist. You can see it's just assetpackagist.org. And then I required, in this case, the drop zone library. And then you have to tell it, you have to add to your installer paths that NPM asset and Bower asset should be placed under the web root in libraries, in the libraries directory. And here's how you would make your own, using Composer, set up a repository for a particular version of an asset library. In this case, it's chosen. So I've just pointed to the GitHub repo, the version that I want, and then down in the require section said the version I want. Again, this isn't recommended. This isn't a way I would recommend it. Yes, question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
On the previous slide, you're showing using Asset Packagist. Do you have to use Umfink, Composer Installer's extender, in order to do this approach, or can you just say type NPM asset or Bower asset?
I believe you need the extender, the installer's extender. I'm not positive, but I think that's true. Yes, that's right. Thank you for pointing that out. The question was around the installer's extender package that helps make new installer options available, right? And yes, that would be necessary, I imagine. So using NPM or Yarn, which are I kind of consider to be the right tool for asset libraries, that allows you to control the updating, which version is used, and that sort of thing. The asset library is not bundled in your application. You're not committing it to your repo. However, the files will go into the node modules directory, and then they need to be copied in some way. And so when I looked at that challenge, how can I get the files only the files that need to be under the web root copied from node modules into my libraries directory, I was looking at the idea of the way Drupal works with scaffolding, where it just moves files from one place to another. So there are some options for that. Here are four that I'm aware of. I looked at the Midcamp theme, and this vendor copy library is actually being used to copy files, front-end assets, asset libraries from one directory to another in the Midcamp theme. My preference is copy files from two. That's the one that has worked best for me, and when I get to the demo part, I'll show how that works.
So,
yeah.
So when you're using NPM, is the node modules in sort of like the project root below the web root?
The question was around where the node modules directory is. The node modules directory will be at the top level, and I'll show that in the demo.
Doc root or /web is like up here.
Up here, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
So that takes us to the idea of a monorepo, which is a strategy where the code for a bunch of projects is stored in the same repository. And that describes Drupal well, because we have this idea of a Drupal site or Drupal application, and it's this sort of parent thing. Then we have the various elements, modular elements underneath it, modules, extensions, and that sort of thing. And thinking about it as a monorepo is a way to sort of, I think, help understand the project better, and to think about those dependencies in a different way. The dependencies of the modules and theme to, or the dependencies of the larger project to the individual modules and themes. So why would you want to make a monorepo? And one of the main things is it allows us to encapsulate the dependencies where they actually exist. So you define an extension, and by extension I mean a module or a theme. There are dependencies within that extension. So you're no longer being the dependency manager in that, previously I might have said, oh, I need the, let's see, an example. Let's say you make a module that integrates with AWS, so you want that AWS software developer kit for PHP. I would add that to the top level composer file. Say, I need the AWS package. And then I make my module. And now those are kind of disconnected. I've made the dependency on the whole Drupal application and not on the individual module that actually does require it. So it just feels like it's aligning better with the whole idea of dependency management to actually put the dependency where it belongs with the module. And in order to do that, you then need to make your module a dependency in Composer, and I'll show later what that looks like also. Another example would be if I've done this before, where I've made a module that uses Guzzle to make HTTP requests. Guzzle is included in, I believe it's a Symfony package, so it's included when you're running Drupal. So in my custom module, I didn't specify that I needed Guzzle. It's just kind of coming along for free, but that's sort of a stealth dependency. It's secret that is not really documented in any way. If you did a composer command to say, like, hey, why is Guzzle needed? It wouldn't say anything about your custom module that definitely needs Guzzle. So there's also future functionality coming in Drupal that seems to be going in the direction of more composer-focused dependency. For example, recipes require a composer.json file. And if you're going to make a recipe installer kit the way that a Drupal CMS is, you have to do it using Composer. You specify in the installer kit the recipes that you need using their Composer name. So Drupal needs to know about it, and Composer needs to know about it. And I'll talk about some other ways that it may be useful in the future to have those Composer files and actually managing your your modules and themes using Composer. So making a monorepo in Drupal is pretty straightforward. You need to create a composer.json file and place it in the module or theme, and then in your composer.json file you need to specify the location where those exist as a repository, and I will show all of this in the demo part. And then you define that module as a dependency. And then you can define a workspace in NPM or Yarn, and I will demo that also. And I'm more used to NPM, so that's what I'll be showing, but I believe the functionality is similar in Yarn. So what does the future look like for dependency management in Drupal? Some of this is already here. We've got things like Project Browser, automatic updates. Those are all changing the way dependencies are managed through Drupal because there's a user interface. And they're all built on top of Package Manager, which is an experimental module. It's API only. It doesn't have a UI, but it's a Drupal core module that allows Drupal to make changes to its own running code base using Composer. So it's updating Composer using the UI. And there are 3 instances of that going that are happening right now, including the Drupal CMS launcher and automatic updates, project browser. And then just a few days ago, I mean, maybe a week and a half ago, a new package was released that helps make working with recipes better. It's called Core Recipe Unpack. When you add a recipe as a dependency, this plugin takes the dependencies that the recipe has and moves them into your core Composer file. And it actually then removes the recipe as a dependency, because you don't actually want the recipe is meant to be used once. It's still there so that you can apply it, but it's no longer listed as a dependency for your whole project. But the child dependencies have been copied into your main composer.json file. So what else might we see? There's been talk about replacing .info.yaml files and only use composer.json, which seems like that would be a move toward thinking about this in a way that I'm sort of proposing, where we're really thinking about it from a PHP dependency management standpoint using Composer. At some point, maybe Drupal extensions could live in the vendor directory outside of the web root instead of /modules or /themes. And maybe we will see a standardization of management of asset libraries. Maybe we'll say Yarn is the way to go, and we'll, as a community, come up with a way to sort of establish some standards for how we're going to use that dependency management tool within Drupal. So there will be lots of continued discussion and evolution, but lots coming, I'm sure. So just to summarize before I get into the demo, consider the different ways. If you download a contributed module, take a look at the different ways that the asset library could be included and figure out which ones are the best for your use case, taking into account those 4 goals that I mentioned: security, maintainability, performance, and reliability, and then use whatever dependency management is right for your needs. Consider making your Drupal project a monorepo and thinking about it that way and approaching it that way. Okay, so okay, here we go. So I have this is a Drupal 11.2 site. So you can see I actually have that. Is that big enough? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can see that package that I just talked about, that core recipe unpack, is here. So if I were to run a composer require on a recipe, it would then unpack them and do what I described. So one thing to point out is if you use the Drupal recommended project, then if you look here under installer paths, there is, the usual ones that you'd expect here: Drupal module, Drupal theme, Drupal custom module, and Drupal custom profile and Drupal custom theme are already there. These are already sort of set up to support the custom module approach that I'm talking about. So if you take a look at my require section here, I actually have a module called midcamp CK editor libraries and a theme called midcamp theme. And you can see you could use version control on them. I kind of find that to be just not that useful, so I don't really track the versions on those. So the repository for those, you can see I've created a custom modules repository, and I've pointed to the modules/custom and then globbing everything that's in there. Same thing for profiles, same thing for themes. So what that means is I just am putting the files in the usual place. I'm creating them there. You can see here's the CK editor libraries module. It's just in the usual place that would go. So Composer looks at that and says, oh, it's already there. I don't need to move it. So you could store these all out in some sort of packages directory, and of course, if you're sharing them across projects, you'd want to put it in a external repo so that you could bring them in that way. But if you're just, this is a custom module for this particular project, it can live in the usual spot. I have a composer file for it. You can see I've just given it this name, custom functionality. You can see there's that version. I'm not really tracking that. And then I am defining that the CKEditor plugin pack module is required for this. So within and the reason you might want to do this is because CKEditor, has anyone used this CKEditor plugin pack? It adds a lot of additional functionality that is not included with Drupal core, and it's all free. There's an additional module that has more premium plugins, but these are all free. It uses the CDN, so if you're offline and you're trying to work, your toolbar completely disappears if you've got a plugin that requires it. So say you wanted to be able to have those included, you can see that I have I'm within the module, I have a script called libraries copy. Rimraf just deletes a file, and you can see it's deleting the libraries file because that's this here, and I'm not tracking those files. I want it to be CKEditor plugins to be removed, and then I'm running copy files too. And so that's that library that I mentioned that will copy files from one place to another. You specify here in the copy file section or in a separate file what you want to have copied. And I usually put a description in here just to show what this is that I'm copying. But you can see this is a little ugly, but it's going up to the node modules directory, going into CKEditor 5, getting the find and replace files, only the ones from the build. So again, I'm not getting all the test files and everything else from the package. I'm only getting what I need. And and it's getting copied to the libraries directory, CKEditor plugins, and all this. Sometimes figuring out where it needs to go just involves reading, the module's README file. If we take a look at the CKEditor plugin pack settings, you can see that it actually supports this local file approach. If this is empty, it'll use the CDN. In this case, I'm telling it, here's where my files exist, and that's where it will find them. So if I run, let me point out that at the top level, I have a package.json file which defines my whole application, and I've got this libraries copy script. And what it does is it runs libraries copy in all the workspaces that are defined, and it says if you add the if present, then it won't bark at you if that script doesn't exist. So remember, libraries copy does exist in that modules file. It also exists in my theme. If we look at the custom theme, I'm bringing in Alpine, and I'm bringing in the inter variable font, which is very popular. And you can see I'm also using copy files from 2 here. The libraries copy deletes the build directory in the theme and then runs copy from 2. So when I run it from the root, it will run both of those. Okay. So you can see it copied the files that I needed. And if we take a look at the libraries directory now, you can see I do have exactly what I need for CKEditor plugins, the version, DLL, find and replace. I just have the one JavaScript file. I did bring in the translations. I don't know if they're necessary, but so now if I use this, now I can get those files locally. So there's only 5 minutes left, so I want to leave time for questions because there probably are some. What questions do you have specifically around this kind of approach where I didn't mention, so here's where the workspaces are defined. So you can see I'm saying anywhere in web themes, custom, any directories in there are considered a workspace. And within this modules directory, anything in custom is considered a workspace. So now if I only wanted to run one, I could say run libraries copy workspace, and then the name of the workspace, which is going to be this. So now it just ran that one. So you can always target from your top level. As long as you just point to which workspace you want to work with, it will run the script in that. And one of the things that I like about this approach is a lot of times you'll see, cd into this directory and run, npm install, and then whatever other scripts you want to run. The node modules directory will be in the theme, and it doesn't need to be there. So following my philosophy of keeping things out that don't need to be there, you could write a script like as part of your build process to delete that later, but I'd rather it not ever be there. And so with this approach, you can see I now have my build directory with the JavaScript I need, with Alpine.js and my fonts, only the files that I need within the theme. Question?
I have a lot of questions, so maybe I can say them and then you can decide which ones you want to answer right now. One is, what is your build process, and like if you use one of the more common hosting environments like NPM and Yarn, like what's the process to use with that? I also wanted to ask if you had, if you're aware of the Front-End Builder Initiative.
I am, and I forgot to mention it. But thank you for the Front-End Builder Initiative. There's a Slack channel for it. And you can probably explain it better.
No, I can't actually. I didn't want to put that out there because I know it's something that's happening.
Yes, if you're interested in keeping track of it, the Front-End Builder Initiative is a good place to do it. There's a module called Foxy, I think, that is part of that, and I don't understand some of the details of it, but I know it's an effort to try to get some standardization around library assets.
Another question I have is if you have submodules in your module, having a composer.json in those doesn't sort of work the same way, because when you're just requiring the parent module. So how do you, if you want to have your assets defined in that submodule as well, like it's only needed for the submodule, how would you handle that? That's what I struggle with, that because I maintain the charts module. And each one of the submodules has its own set of libraries. So if I pulled them out and made them their own module, then when I did a require, it would bring them in, but it doesn't do that when it's the charts parent module.
So if I understand the issue, so yeah, submodules is not something that I have dealt with this approach. But if you, so the concern is around that you say that those libraries won't be recognized. I mean, if you're looking at adding library assets, you could add those as a workspace. So you could say, web contrib. I think this would work. Maybe no, you don't need that. This. And then the workspaces. And then your submodules would be workspaces also, assuming they're under the modules directory within your with your main project. Does that seem like that would be a solution? You could then have the scripts be in there. Anything you run would.
And does composer.json not just package.json?
The way that I approach it is if I have PHP dependencies, or like I will always create a composer file because it's a PHP project. I only will do the package.json if it needs front end libraries also. Oh, lots of questions. Yes.
What would be the benefits of the approach to this? Say all you have is a theme, kind of like a front end theme, a theme, and like what would be the benefits of a root package JSON versus a theme package JSON?
So the question is around if you're making a theme, what would be the benefit of having a, you're saying having a
package JSON in the theme versus a package JSON in the
in the
for
overall
the entire
project.
site, yeah.
I would suggest having a package.json for the theme, and that's what I have here. So
Oh, okay.
so it's there and it's defining its dependencies. This is for the theme. The font that's going to be used, the tool for interaction, and then the larger package.json defines this as a workspace. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to know what's in the get ignore file. How do you what are you separating out from each other?
Right. So get ignore. I've got the build directory in the theme ignored because that's going to get wiped out every time when the libraries copy. Or this is a simple example. You'd be doing all sorts of other things, I'm sure. But your build directory is where your compiled files are going to be. Those are not ever going to be tracked. Those are just part of the build process. So that's ignored. The libraries directory, you can see it's not ignored. It should be that normally I would ignore that because that could get wiped out at any time. That is never meant to be tracked. Does that answer your question, or are there more?
So I guess, can you show your
Oh yeah.
real quick? Sit down.
So the usual vendor directory,
Right, okay. So you're committing your custom modules,
Yes.
except you're ignoring certain things inside them if it's got a build thing, for instance.
Right. So
166.
what's that?
You're on it.
Or, yeah.
I see.
There. Yeah. Ignore files generate custom themes, so it's ignoring the build. Like I say, libraries is not in here currently, but it should be.
Got it.
I was going to ask about the workspaces. I hadn't seen that. It seems really positive, having a root, and it can have the interdependencies. But I saw you defined the libraries copy in both the root and the theme, and I didn't know in what order. Like those things are run when you run like npx or npm run for the script, right?
Right.
And then when you npm install, does it also chain through the workspaces? And what order does it run those things?
So I didn't show running npm install. It will npm install will install everything within the workspaces. It looks at that. Each workspace's package.json file and it installs whatever, and it actually reconciles the versions. I think if there are different versions needed, it will put the node modules directory in with, but generally I can avoid that and just have the single node modules directory at the top.
Okay.
I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, I think that for npm install it did, and I didn't know the two different libraries copy. The one inside the theme deletes the node modules folder for the dependencies, and the top level one would copy them down from the theme.
The module or the theme, I'm not deleting any node modules directory because none are getting created within the theme.
Or the libraries.
The libraries directory I'm focusing on just what it creates. So for example, the theme is only creating the build directory, so it is deleting the build directory within the theme. The module is only creating the CKEditor libraries. At the top level, you may say, wipe out the libraries directory for me. You probably would want to do that, because then when you run it, every module or theme that needs something will place what it needs in the appropriate place, including that libraries directory. Okay. Well, if you have more questions,
Sorry, the first question I asked about, like using Pantheon, for example. Do you know
right.
if it's running any of the NPM commands?
generally, if you're working with Pantheon or Acquia or another host, you'd be you can certainly do that as part of the build process within. I know certainly within Acquia but you could also use, Travis or whatever other tool, GitHub Actions, to actually run all of this and compile your artifact for deployment to Pantheon or whatever host. Okay. If you have more questions, find me and feel free to ask. All right.